page 29 in your books. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Keats before we talk about Ode on Grecian Urn. John Keats is also a romantic poet, and please take notes, okay? John Keats is also a romantic poet like Wordsworth and Coleridge and Blake, although not like them. Okay, so we have a slight difference with Keats. Sorry for the pause here, but we've got everyone taking out their notebooks to take notes. Okay, so we are on page 829. All right. The focus of the Romantics shifted from community to individual, and we talked a little bit about that. You know, we had Pope's Rape of the Lock, and we talked about how you're supposed to fit in society and the class structure at the very beginning of the semester with all of that. But now we are focused on the individual. The poets wrote of the process of poetry's creation. We've also talked about that. Blake and the tiger. Who is it that creates the tiger? We've also talked about, with Wordsworth, the whole fact that, number one, Coleridge and Wordsworth are setting out to do something unique. They want to create this poetry of an individual perspective about feelings and things like that, but it's also that it is, you go to a place, you experience a spot of time, the poet goes back, remembers, and reality is, or the poetry is what is half perceived and what's half created. The poets wrote of this process, as we saw in Blake and Wordsworth, and we also see that the poetry that the Romantics create celebrates insight. It celebrates insight. And so, to some extent, it celebrates poetic insight, and it looks at objects of nature as the means of insight. We had lots going on with Wordsworth talking about that we can experience nature, we want to be one with nature, and then in the adult stage we get that break, and then the poet returns to that. But nature is not so totally the focus for Keats, though he does embrace the sensual. If you read The Eve of St. Agnes, no, that was not required, but you could read The Eve of St. Agnes and see how he embraces the sensual. He lived from 1795 to 1821, so he died pretty young. He died at 25 years of age. Okay, so this is still when he's, I don't know, I guess you could say this is when he's more in the sensual age of his life rather than the I've just got to pay bills age. He did not begin writing until he was 18 years old. So think about that, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. In 8 years, he became a poet who was, we recognize him as a great poet. I make fun of him a lot, but in 8 years, he began writing poetry that is recognized as some of the greatest poetry. He writes about things like sleep, death. He writes about poetry, about beauty, about art. No one can match the speed of his development. You don't see poets become great poets in 8 years. He didn't start writing until he was 18, died at the age of 25. This is amazing. I think he's a little schmaltzy, but then I'm not crazy about romantic poetry. But schmaltzy. Do we know the word schmaltzy?
Cheesy.
Cheesy, thank you. Okay, sorry. I like that word. I'm using, I guess it's Yiddish, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I know.
Did anybody else know the word schmaltz? You've heard schmaltzy. Okay. I had a whole class where, what?
See, my aunt is Jewish.
Ah, so she uses schmaltz?
I've heard it. I just heard it before.
Okay, good. I had a whole class one time and nobody had ever heard schmaltzy. So, okay. Schmaltzy. It is schmaltzy. Sometimes, but it's not sappy. It's not all sappy. We also want to be careful not to read him too autobiographically. The poem is a made thing. Yes, he gets sick and he's dying and all of that. And, I've actually been to his house in Rome where he died. There was Spanish steps, famous Spanish steps in Rome. It's like steps they brought from Spain. They're huge, beautiful. And then next to it is where the Keats house where Keats died. And it was really cool to be there. But I did not do what Dr. Mitchell says that he did. He said, oh, you gotta lie down on the bed, look at the ceiling and experience what Keats experienced. I got there and there's a sign that says, do not sit on the bed. I was like, yeah, he just wants me to set up an alarm. I did not do that. But anyhow, I don't know, there must be something special you can see on the ceiling. I haven't done that. I follow the rules. So anyhow, the poem is a made thing. You don't want to read it too autobiographically about this, what's in his life. We want to know about, you might want to think about Plato, not Plato, but Plato, the ancient philosopher, who separates the world of material things from the world of ideas or forms. We have that transcendent realm of the transcendent forms, okay, that the world of material things participates in. Shelley, another poet, same time, Shelley, another romantic poet, followed Plato and connected the unseen shadow of the unseen power. We get this idea that life is hallowed by the shadow. You want to think about, there are connections with the romantics and this idea of getting caught up with an ideal that is beyond, the beauty of what is beyond. Still, Keats does not go flying off quite as badly as Shelley, which is why I don't teach Shelley, because Keats goes far enough for me to fly off. But anyhow, I don't hate Keats. I do recognize the importance of him, but still. Keats finds inside the human soul a place of unity, in the night of the unconscious. There's much development in his poetry of the border between dreaming and waking. We get a lot of that, what's dream and what's awake, what's death and what's alive, that sort of thing. But that unity is expressed in poetry and art. What the imagination sees as beauty, it must also be truth. I mean, think about it. What is the ultimate, where does truth ultimately reside? Not necessarily for Keats, I mean, not Baptist, but where would we say truth resides? What?
In our mind.
Whoa, modern, well, postmodern. The truth is in our minds?
Yes.
Okay, some people think it's in our minds.
In our heart.
Oh, it's in our hearts. Like we have more truth. There's more truth in our hearts and minds than anywhere else.
That's deep, but I don't know.
What?
I'm not sure right now.
Oh, I totally
People are
just...
throwing
Do
around
we
a whole
actually
lot of
possess
things.
truth, or do we just perceive it?
So if we just perceive truth, where does the most truth reside?
The Lord?
Yes, okay. God, we would say, God holds the most truth. Plato wouldn't say God, but that there is truth out there and we're trying to get to, and Aristotle says we're trying to get to it. So it's kind of like it's out there, although Aristotle kind of brings it down a little bit. But okay, we've got this idea that truth resides in God. And what would be the most beautiful of all that exists? Where is the ultimate of beauty and goodness and truth?
God.
God, yes. Okay. So it's not in our minds anymore?
No.
God's better than we are at having truth and beauty. Okay. So you
hope
can
not.
kind of think about
I was just
it's
waiting
kind
for
of
this.
scary.
Put
We're
one there.
not to the 20th century yet. But we've got beauty and truth beauty must be truth. Also, you might look for some, now these are the romantics and we're not exactly reaching the Christian God at this point, but you can think about it in kind of abstract, philosophic terms instead of in Christian and theological terms. Okay, we want to start with the whole idea of ode on a Grecian urn. You don't need to read the Nightingale. I mean, it would be lovely for you to read Ode to a Nightingale as well, but Ode on a Grecian Urn is just more, I think it's the one that you need to know. Ode on a Grecian Urn on page 829, and we're going to go kind of carefully through this line by line, and we might want to like do a break and then start over. Okay.